So the dough has been resting now for about 20 minutes and it's ready to be kneaded. Now brioche dough is not the easiest to work with. At this stage, before the butter and the salt have been added, it's stiff and sticky, and it really is not nice to knead. Once the butter has been added, it will turn into an almighty mess. Now it can be worked by hand, and that's what I'm going to do here, but one might very well wish to put this in a stand mixer and mix this at this stage until the gluten's developed somewhat. Add the salt and the butter and continue until the dough is ready. Now the reason I haven't added the butter yet is because fat inhibits the development of the gluten, and it's much easier, especially if working by hand, to knead this somewhat to begin with without the butter, add the butter and then finish it off. So I'm going to knead this in the usual way on the worktop with no flour, no oil or anything else. So I'll take this sticky mess out and start to work it with both hands in the usual way. Whoops. Okay, so after 5 minutes or so, I've got a reasonably smooth dough, and it's got some elasticity to it. It's still a horrible dough to work. It's sticky and it doesn't develop quite like a normal bread dough. But at this stage, I'm just going to flip the bowl over the top and cover it, and I'm going to come back in about 10 minutes, at which point I'll add the salt and then start to incorporate the butter. So my dough's been resting now for about 10 minutes, and at this stage I'm going to get the salt in, and then I shall add the butter. So I'm just going to stretch this out a little bit and add the salt. Now I've got 12 grams of salt here, so that's 2% of the overall flour weight. I'm just going to work that salt into the dough so it doesn't start flying out as soon as I start working it again. Okay. So I'm just going to stretch that dough back out and incorporate the butter. Now this looks like a lot of butter, and that's because it is a lot of butter. Brioche is very rich in butter, and recipes vary in the proportion used. Here I'm using half of the flour weight in butter, so this is 300 grams of butter. Now if it looks as though this butter won't actually go into the dough and it's going to make quite a mess, don't worry about it, it will eventually work in. So, just going to fold that in. And then start working it again. Quite gently to start with, because you don't want the butter flying everywhere. Now as you can see, there's quite a lot sticking to the worktop. Don't worry about it, it will be a bit of a mess for a while. Just every now and then scrape that up and get that back into the dough. Okay, so after another minute or two, I've reached this point where it is proper messy. The dough is now ever so soft and it's sticking to the worktop. It's just a gloppy mess and it's very awkward to work. At this stage you might imagine that something has gone desperately wrong and you might even try and give up. But persist with it, this will work in and this gloppy mess will turn into a nice dough. It will still be sticky at the end, but after it's been fermenting and then possibly resting even overnight in the fridge, then this is going to turn into a lovely dough. At the moment, this is a real mess. So come back in a couple of minutes, the job will be done. Okay, so that's about 10 minutes hard work to get this dough into some sort of reasonable shape. Now it's still very sticky, but now it's got some good elasticity. And all the while you're kneading it to develop the gluten, the butter in the dough is working against you, acting to shorten those gluten strands. At this stage, it's ready to be fermented. And so what I'm going to do is just sort of scoop that up into a bowl, put a little flour on the worktop and shake that up. Little flour on the hands. I'm just going to lightly fold that into a ball. Now it won't have the strength of a normal bread dough, but that's fine for what we're wanting here. So I'm going to leave that covered now for about an hour to ferment, and then I'm going to come and check on the state of it and give it a fold, and then probably give it another hour to an hour and a half, at which point it will be ready either to divide, shape and prove, or to then be refrigerated overnight, and then I can return to them in the morning. The dough will be in a slightly easier state to work when it's cold, and then the dough can be brought back up to room temperature. The shaped dough can then prove and then be baked off tomorrow. So right now I'm going to cover that and be back in an hour. So my brioche dough has now been fermenting for about an hour, and I'm going to have a little look at it and give it a quick fold. Now brioche dough is fairly slow to develop. It takes a bit longer than a normal lean dough. So I'll just brush the excess flour off. What was once an awful sticky mess has just turned into a still slightly tacky but nice soft supple dough. There, doesn't look too bad. So I'll flour the bowl again, pop that back in and cover it back up. Now I'm going to ferment that for at least another hour, possibly an hour and a half, so I'll come back and have a look in 1 hour's time. The dough has now been fermenting for 2 hours and it's developed into quite a nice soft pillowy dough. I'm just going to take that out, dust off the excess flour. And I'm going to give this another fold to get some strength back into the dough. Okay, so at this stage I could divide this into portions depending how I'm going to bake it, and I could shape that and allow that to prove for, let's say, an hour, hour and a half, and then bake them off. Or I could put this in the refrigerator, which is what I'm going to do, and let that dough gently, slowly develop overnight, and I can then divide that in the morning, allow the dough to return to room temperature, prove it, and then bake. This dough is still slightly tacky. This is going to be quite nice to handle when it's cold, and the dough will obviously improve with that overnight process. So I'm just going to flour the bowl again, return the dough, a light dusting on top, and I'll cover that and I'll pop that in the fridge.